Oh, no, it's not. I got to get this together. Yeah, you're important.
All right. You want me to hug?
I'm in that panic mode.
I think we're gonna talk about like what the process is, and then how hard it works. And
What? No idea where we're talking to.
we can talk about how hard it worked, and what the process was. We can talk about how hard it worked, what the process is, and how much effort. Yeah, and then
You want to sit here? I don't think that's just sit right here. You can, yeah, you can sit right here. Of course you can. Everybody's got a seat.
so I'll talk first, then who wants to go?
Me.
Okay, Liv, Felix, and then you can add in anything that we didn't say.
Okay. Sounds good. Wait, Keith,
So,
what are you gonna say?
what are you
I
planning to
have no
say?
idea. Just say whatever you don't say. I got all of the copies put into it.
Yeah.
Why we chose, why we like Florida. We have limited time to do this. Yeah. I got all the cards. Until we do the I don't make I do not know because I was not the group that originally presented Florida Rough and Release.
So,
Last time you smoked so this is because I don't know.
wait, but guys, let's just try to like add on the stuff that we didn't say already, so try not to repeat stuff.
So I'm just adding on like other people. So this is entirely
Make an announcement, I will ask.
I only did
Because the Florida representative is the biggest one that can sit there and then right there, I know what their presentation
Other people want to come. We're the best. You were the one that suggested it, right? That's cool.
Wait, so these are mute is only active while pressed.
So don't. You can only like press.
So press that. Wait, you push it? You don't need to. Oh, clock. He's directly above the camera. I don't know if mine's on.
Test.
Ah, I have it. I found the golden setup.
You can move it around.
Except, of course, it has to be like this. So I can talk and whatever. Anyway, I think it's muted right now.
Wait, what's that?
Wow.
They're all old guys.
Yeah.
It's so annoying. We worked so hard for this.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they just want to get...
Yeah, we worked so hard, and then they're just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna push you over.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We don't. That name's good, but we're not using it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your hour every Wednesday after school, basically.
2 hours.
Oh,
Hour and a half.
Your hour and a half after school, basically was just us sucking time where you're supposed to be doing your homework. No, but I mean, like, are any other people from the community? You met people and we sucked time out of your day.
Hi, good afternoon. First, has anyone put together a sign-up sheet by any chance? Probably not. So I will start one. We're going to circulate a piece of paper. I would appreciate it if, since this is a public hearing, that everyone sign in so we can make sure that you're all in the record when we put together the information for the advisory committee. So, my name is Cliff Brown, and I am the chair of the school subcommittee. And I'd like to make just a couple of opening comments for everybody, if I might. We are here to listen to 3 warrant articles this afternoon. They all deal with the renaming of the Coolidge Elementary School. I don't really want to. We're listening to 3 warrant articles this afternoon, all of which deal. Sure.
Is it a recording microphone or
I don't know if it's an amplified microphone. Is it?
No,
I think it's just for the
video.
I think it's just for the video. I will try to speak louder though. Okay. Again, we are listening to 3 warrant articles this afternoon, all of which deal with the renaming of the Coolidge Corner Elementary School. The supporters of each article have 15 minutes per article to state their case. We're going to try to strictly hold to that time limit. I want to state for the record that a complaint has been registered with the Attorney General's office regarding the selection process. It is my own view that because the advisory committee is not really in a position to judge the legal issues, it would be preferable if the selection process issue were not discussed in this forum. I don't know if people will hold to that request, but I would personally greatly appreciate it. If and when the Attorney General determines that there was an issue that needs to be addressed, I'm sure it will be discussed at that time by the relevant bodies, which even then probably is not the advisory committee. The public will be provided an opportunity to comment and to speak. We probably should, well, I'm not going to put together a list of, have people write down. You'll just raise your hands when it comes time. I would ask everyone to keep their comments brief, and if you don't really have anything new to add to the conversation, if what you are going to say has been said already, please consider from taking up additional time and just state your preference for who you would like the school to be named after. Finally, with something like this, there really is no right or wrong decision. All of the proposed names are deserving individuals, and it is possible and perhaps likely that other names will be offered from the floor of town meeting. The subcommittee has received over 30 emails and voicemails supporting one or another of the proposed names. I have to say that it was disappointing that some of those messages were quite vituperative in their characterization of the motivations and perspectives of the sponsors and supporters of names different than the preferred name of the writer. Our operating thesis today is assume good intent, and we will not tolerate unfounded accusations from anyone, including petitioners. So please be respectful. Thank you. Having said that, the petitioners for the school committee and et al. Are up first, and I guess I'm looking at a panel over here. Is there an individual who's going to be starting us off?
So, my name's Emery Shandu Ruiz. I was in 7th grade last year. I'm currently in 8th grade, and I was one of the members of the committee for the name change. And last year, I was part of the group for the committee where we worked every single Wednesday for 2 hours to select the name that we found appropriate and reasonable to be named, a school named after. And we put in so much time and so much effort in this that I feel it's unfair that our opinion is suddenly being forgotten, but I do appreciate that you're having a chance now to state your own opinion. And I think for the benefit of the community, we can all see these different opinions. And I put in a lot of dedication to be able to do this. Thank you. Liv?
Good evening. My name is Liv Clowder, and I am the. Okay, sorry. Good evening. Really? Good evening. My name is Liv Clowder, and I am a student on the renaming committee, also known as the Believers in Change. And I currently attend to CCS as a 5th grader, but was chosen for the committee in 4th grade. Near the end of our time together last year, we started meeting multiple times a week, not including even the renaming nights, preparing for the public meetings, and the school committee. We put aside so much of our schedule for the school name. I myself remember the days where I would drop my backpack on the floor and spend hours on the computer, researching, making docs, perfecting slides, creating scripts, and so much more. We worked so hard because, as students that go to CCS, and as kids on the committee, it mattered to us. I remember learning about the committee, dreaming to be on it, because it's my school name we're changing, my school history being made, and I wanted to be a part of changing it. I wanted to be able to have an impact on my school name and my school future. At the end of all of our hard work, we chose 4 names, including Florida Ruff and Ridley. Florida stood out to the committee for many reasons. First, the Believers in Change wanted a name that said the opposite to what Edward Devotion did. Edward Devotion owned a slave and had a slave in his will. He stole that person's life. Since before we know, slaves have been looked over. Even after the Civil War, slaves were slaves. They didn't matter. But now we've decided that those slaves matter, that Devotion's slave matter, that that life is worth something, that that slave was a something, a someone, and a person just like you and me. And our committee chose to honor that slave. So that's why Florida Ruff and Ridley fits with that. She collected and preserved Black stories. She also is a great role model for the students of CCS. She follows the motto and shows us that we can have courage, even when you are talked down or underestimated, or when you feel that nobody is like you, because that's what she did. We considered all the submitted names respectfully and equally, because when you really come down to it, it is who that person is as a school name, how the students will look up to it, what impact it will have on the community. And to those of you who are rooting for Ethel Weiss, I used to buy lollipops from her store.
I liked her and we considered her, but she just didn't make our final list. So now I just want you to think about how you would feel to put so much time and work into picking the school name, just to have it be picked another name and your time gone to waste. I just want to remind you one more time of the work, the effort, the passion, the heart we put into our school name, which I want to be named after Florida Rough and Ridley. Thank you.
My name is Felix. My name is Felix. I'm a fifth grader at CCS. My name is Felix. I'm a fifth grader at CCS. And adding to what Liz said about Florida Rough and Ridley, she was a civil rights activist and suffragist, which means she was involved in many anti-segregation events and many other things. She founded many suffragist organizations and wrote about race relations in New England. This means she was assertive and worked hard, and that is a good model for our school. Second, she was also one of the first African American public school teachers, and that gives a direct connection to teaching. I think she should be our new school name because she helped others by joining and donating money to nonprofit organizations. She also worked hard with all her jobs, and she became one of the first African American teachers. She was kind because she helped many people fight for their rights. All these pile up to her motto: work hard, be kind, and help others. Thank you.
And I'm Keith Colbert-Laurie, and I am currently in 6th grade. Last year I was in 5th grade, and well, I just think Florida Rough and Ridley should be the name for the school.
I'd also like to add on that throughout all of the year last year and throughout so many of the committees that we spoke at last year, we were occasionally criticized that we had been manipulated by some of the adults that had ran it, and I'd like to restate that now, as we had to do so many times last year, that we weren't, and all our effort and everything that you see here today was us, the kids that put in so much time that we could have been spending with our friends and even studying for tests that other kids had. We spent doing this for our school. Thank you.
Yes, we have.
To add on to what Emery said, we chose those names, and like it wasn't the principals or anybody. They set up the structure, so like that we had to come down to like 16 names out of the 100 and some that were submitted, and then that using the public's votes after the renaming nights, that we had to narrow it down to 4 and then present them to the school committee, and we chose all that, and these scripts are written by us, and it was us.
Thank you all. I have a few comments, and it may be contingent upon how well.
Deborah, can you use the mic because it'll pick up for the, yeah, thank you.
All right, my big struggle is understanding PowerPoint, even in 2000. Well, the New York Times, or New Yorker once said it was the worst invention ever. Well, we may not have a PowerPoint presentation because I want to keep this ball rolling. Probably the slide that I was most proud of, and I'm just going to click to it. If it shows up, it doesn't show up. I can't figure this system out at all.
PowerPoint crashed. That's right.
It said my PowerPoint crashed?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's reopening.
All right. But one of the things, that's my doctor's note. One of the things that struck me most about the renaming was the sheer dedication that I saw by the young people, by the believers' parents, by the entire community, that you just don't see that often. And so I swear to you, it was ready to go.
It's here. It was.
It was. Well, we'll just, you know what, I'm not going to worry about it.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. So this is my favorite slide. This is the slide that makes me cry and gives me this real sense of pride and hope about the direction of this community. But we heard some about Florida Ruffins, Ridley's contributions. Anti-lynching, and I'm going to say anti-lynching at a time when it wasn't safe to be a proponent of anti-lynching. She was one of those people, and oh, by the way, she was a Brookline resident for over 20 years. I just want to point that out. She was one of those people with her family that started the newspaper Women's Era, and it was the first African-American women's newspaper in the country. She organized the first Women of Color conference in the country. And note the first. She founded the Society of Descendants of Early New England Negroes. She helped with an organization that in some respects was a precursor to the NAACP, and that was the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She was the second, and I think one of the young people pointed out that she was the second African-American teacher in Massachusetts. The list is much longer. She was also one of those writers that has flown under the radar screen for now 2 generations, but is having a resurgence. But what I want to get to is, this all started when Anne Greenwald and I filed a warrant article, and the town in May of 2018 said, by a vote of 171 to 19, that the school should no longer be named Edward Devotion. And that's how this process got started. But I want to be one of those people that acknowledges that a lot of people loved the name Devo, loved the name Devotion. It brings out school pride. It was a sense of family. It constituted strong relationships. It gave people a safe place when their homes weren't so safe. But we're not here to erase history. And we're not here to deny that there's a lot of emotion that goes into changing the name of a school. But I also have to say that the renaming process, and this is me talking, is my sense of what it's like to live in Alabama or Mississippi and see a Confederate monument go down. It's our rethinking our history and our roles. Slavery was always about white supremacy. It was always about white supremacy. And this town made multiple steps in eradicating that. We don't acknowledge the contributions that women and people of color have made in this community or in this society. And there are plenty of emotions on that side of the ledger as well. Finally, and again, one of the young people spoke to this. This is about restorative justice. It's about saying we did things for a while and we've learned that it might not have been the best, but we can start doing things differently. We can acknowledge our mistakes and try to help people feel whole. And so I want to end very quickly with a quote that Debbie Katz passed around this afternoon that just touched me to my core. And it's, when we hear the shofar's call to action this Rosh Hashanah, we must recommit to combating the forces that seek to divide the Jewish community or distract us from doing the work that is so central to our Jewish values. And I'm going to say our Brookline values, our Christian values, our Muslim values, all of them. We must affirm our respect for each other's beliefs, backgrounds, politics, ethnicities, race, gender, sexuality, and abilities. And so I implore you to vote in favor of the name Florida Ruffin Ridley. Thank you.
So, thank you. I just want to let you know that the approach I think we're going to take is to hear each article and then have comments and questions after that.
How did you out of time for Florida Ruffin?
That was 14 minutes, 44 seconds. Larry?
Yes.
And we have how many seconds left?
Yeah, 16 seconds, absolutely.
Can I defer to Barbara Brown for her 16 seconds?
What is a democracy? Democracy requires process. If we don't have process, we fail as a democracy. That is probably the problem of Congress and Washington. We have the process, we have a process, let's follow it.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Larry Rudman and I'm the proponent of an article.
Larry, please, could you go to the podium?
I'm fine here.
No, but the audience is here.
I feel closer to everybody.
We're taking it. So,
This is Eli Davis. Eli is like me. I'll talk from here. Eli, come on. Yes, as I said, my name is Larry Rutman. I'm the proponent of the article for Ethel Weiss. There is a group that we call Devotion to Ethel, which was a double entendre struck by Anita Jameson, who's in the room, who's the daughter of Ethel Weiss. And I think that the first thing I want to do is have Eli Davis say a few words. He's one of the children of devotion. He's a little beyond that age now. But he went to devotion, he went to Brookline High, he went to the University of Massachusetts, so did I a year or two before Eli, or maybe a little longer. And I'd just like to have Eli tell of his experience with Ethel Weiss when he was a student, K through 8 at devotion.
Sure.
Eli, can you stand?
As Larry said, my name is Eli. I'm 24 years old, born and raised in Brookline. I attended the devotion school from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. Eventually moved on to play varsity soccer at BHS and attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst. After that, that was in 2017, I moved back in Brookline, and I lived in Coolidge Corner for another 2 years. So, obviously I saw the physical changes to the school, and I recently heard about the name change situation from my mother, who has always had a connection to the devotion PTO. But when she mentioned that Ethel was in the running, I immediately thought, like, wow, that really makes sense. I had a pretty strong relationship with Ethel. I used to go to Hebrew school twice a week after school, and every Tuesday and Thursday I would walk across the street with several of my classmates over to KI, and we would always stop over at Irving's. I'm sure that this still happens, and it happened years and years before me. We would spend the whole week sort of saving for money to try to see how many 5-cent Jolly Ranchers we would get, or maybe on a good week we get some 30-cent candies in there. But at a very young age, me and my friends could tell the difference between going over to Irving's with Ethel versus going to some place like CVS. First of all, when you go to CVS and you see a bunch of little kids run into there looking for candy, the people's first reaction is to try to get us out as quickly and quietly as possible. But with Ethel, she really made it feel like we were actually supposed to be there. She sort of served as an extension to the devotion community, which I felt was amazing. One thing I specifically remember from her was whenever we would go to pay, she helped us with the find out or figure out the change. She did that over and over again with us until we eventually did it all by ourselves. And that was sort of just one of the ways that we sort of felt like we were still at the devotion school when we were over at Irving's. So this was obviously a routine experience for me, but it was not only for me, it was for, I think, the majority of my classmates who routinely visited the store. She was always, it was almost a part of like a rite of passage to visit Ethel and visit Irving's. Now, I'm not here because I think that my generation was influenced a lot by Ethel. I think I'm here because dating all the way back to Larry for the past 80 years or so, she's had her own impact on countless students, dating back to 80 years or so. So I really can't think of another person who has had a longer lasting impact on the youth of Coolidge Corner than Ethel.
Thank you, Eli. Appreciate that. See if I can avoid falling over the wires. When you get to this age, falling is the big danger. Let me introduce myself. My name is Larry. By the way, I want to address Cliff Brown, the chairman, and the other members of the subcommittee. Very happy that you're entertaining these words today. And as far as myself is concerned, I live over on Sumner Road. I've lived there with my wife for 50 years this past August, and we went to, as you know, Brookline schools, and I practiced law for over 40 years. And then under Ethel's influence, maybe not mainly, but certainly in a very strong way, I became an author, and I've been very successful at that. And now at 88, I'm still looking toward the future with a great deal of enthusiasm and love of life. The first thing that hit my eye, I was really out of this. I mean, the whole thing went on, and I was someplace else. I was writing a book. I was doing a lot of other things. I have multiple projects going. But then I saw that the 15 finalists, maybe in the tab or someplace, and Ethel's name was not among them. And that struck me as wrong, totally wrong. I just couldn't understand that. And I wasn't planning to get into a political battle at this stage of life. But that influenced me so much and aroused my passions so profoundly that I decided to get into it, and now I find myself the head of this group, and by God, I'm going to see it to the end. Now let me say to you that my argument basically is the old lawyer's expression, sui generis. Sui generis was an expression of the Romans. I'm sure that Julius Caesar and the other folks living in that century used it, meaning one of a kind. Now, Ethel was one of a kind. And I'll tell you why she was one of a kind as we go on. There is nobody else like Ethel Weiss. Nobody probably ever existed, that's a pretty hyperbolic statement, that did what Ethel did. And it seems to me that the only possible choice for the renaming of the devotion school is Ethel Weiss. It just struck me. I said, I feel that I'm not really a person given to hyperbolic statements and stuff like that. I mean, a lawyer is taught to look at various positions, and I think my nature is to look at that. But it just seems to me that, you'll pardon me for saying so, she's it. She has to be it. Now, let's examine why. I want to read this because I don't usually like to read things, but I'm liable to get lost in this one because I'm not a mathematician. The United States Constitution was passed in 1787, and from that time to the depths of the Civil War in 1863 is 76 years. 1863 to the start of World War II in 1939 is 76 years. That is by way of illuminating the astounding length of time that Ethel Weiss ran her little card and candy shop daily for the benefit of the tens of thousands of devotion kids. 27,750 days. You know, she was open on Sundays. When I found her and got the support for writing, having a career in writing, it was a Sunday, and there she was. I'll tell you about that. And then, how has she helped me? Coming back in 1999 from an oral history lecture in Cambridge, because I was interested in doing that, when Ethel was 85 and I was 68, I felt I needed Ethel's advice and help starting a new career in writing. And what I did was I said to myself, Ethel would be a great first interview. So I parked my car in front of the KI, where I had been bar mitzvahed a long time ago, and walked across the street. And there was Ethel sitting in a store. There were a couple of people there. There were always a couple of people there. And we hugged, as we always did. And I said, you know, Ethel, I've been thinking that, you know, I still want to practice law a little bit, but I'd like to have a writing career, and what do you think of that? Oh, Larry, I think that would be a fantastic idea. You can do that. I said, you know, I'd like to interview first you, because you've always been a good friend. Yeah. She could have said, get a life, Larry, practice law, you know, you're doing fine. What do you need to have that for? No, she didn't say that. No, she could have said, nobody makes money writing, and that's fairly true. Made a lot more as a lawyer. And so that I came back in a couple of days, and I interviewed her. Went great. I found out a lot about Ethel. It's all in my book, Voices of Brookline. Okay, so that she gave me support. Now, would I have gone on to a writing career without her? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, that's how it began. You know, next thing I knew, wonderful things were happening. I was writing for the Tab, and people said, you got to write a book. I wrote a book. The book got a prize. Then I said, well, I'll write about baseball. I love baseball. I wrote a book, and was picked the best one in the country for 2013. And then I went on from there, and I just wrote a book on classical music, another interest. I mean, Ethel, thank you very much, wherever you may be, in heaven for sure, if there is a heaven. Okay, so that if she helped me, how many others, like Eli and other people, has she helped over the years? Because everybody, tens of thousands of students in those 76 years have gone through a devotion school, and they've all go to Ethel's place. I met her in 1939 when I was 8 in the 4th grade, and that was the year that the World War II started. And I knew her and talked to her until 2015, when I was 84 and she was 101, the year she passed away. Incredible. Do you realize how incredible that story is? Do you realize how that cannot be replicated any place in the world? That somebody who was so committed to all those students, and the school was so dependent on her for the support she gave. What support did she give? Well, you know, she gave scholarships to the students. She put up rules for living. She wrote out rules for living. She didn't scold them, but she taught them. She was a total force in that community, not only for Devotion School, Geheleth Israel, North Brookline, you name it. You know, when they came around to give out an award for the first time they gave a Citizens Award, they gave it to Ethel. Who else? Followed by such people as Shobi Hoy, who's a great person, and Elias Audi, whom I love, who's a great person. I mean, these are people that we can't replace, and Ethel was the prime one among them. So she was, you know, and Ethel was a seemingly ordinary person, a plain person. She didn't put on any airs, nothing. But she wasn't an ordinary person. She was an extraordinary person. And that is something that, because she didn't make out to be an extraordinary person, that's what gave her the power, which she wanted. You know, she was not without an awareness of the power she had, and she used it so beautifully. And it's so that she is a one of a kind, whose 76-year story of living for those school kids and the schools dependent on her makes her different in kind. All the other people, there's wonderful people out there, but for this school, they're all different in degree. She's the one who is different in kind. That's why I said to myself, what? She has to be the choice. How could she not be on a list of 15? Well, she got the most votes of anybody except JFK. And she disappeared from sight. How did that happen? Well, since then I've found out how it did happen, but I really don't want to talk about that right now. I want to talk about Ethel Weiss. And 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Okay, I do talk a long time. There's no question about that. I want to make a reference to the documents I've sent to the subcommittee in support of this position. The warrant article, which I wrote, and its explanation. The obituary with 2 pictures and 600 or 700 words put in the Globe by the gifted Brian Marquardt when Ethel passed. And the letter I wrote to the tab in June when I found out that she wasn't, and when I read that she wasn't in the final group. And I think also I sent recently a timeline that shows she's become a national figure. I mean, the networks made documentaries and programs about her. It was unbelievable. And I want to do also, I've said a lot to you about her. There's a lot more I could say that I had here. I figured I'd run out of time. I want to say that Bob Sperber, he's in my book. He was a wonderful guy. I love Bob Sperber. And he was a tough guy. He was a great administrator. And when he said to me, hey, Larry, you did a great job. You got it. Boy, was I relieved. I thought he was going to say, well, you missed this and you missed that. He should have a school named after him. Just not the devotion school, but there are other possibilities. And I think that Florida Ruffin Ridley was a great lady. There's no question about that. She did great things in Boston. She lived in Brookline maybe for 20 years, but she had very little to do with Brookline. I don't see that Florida Ruffin Ridley is an appropriate choice in Brookline for the simple reason that she's not associated with Brookline. I think that Roland Hayes, who lived here all his life and had to go under false pretenses to be able to live here, is a person which you consider. I'm done? Okay, folks. I hope I've conveyed to you some of my passion about this. A lot more can be said. This has to do with democracy in Brookline. The issues here are broad. It's not just Ethel Weiss. I think what's happened is, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for listening to me. I will depart.
I need to hold this. My name is Lee Selwyn. I'm a town meeting member. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Lee Selwyn. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 13. I'm also a member of the advisory committee. I submitted what is now warrant article.
The mic isn't a room mic, Lee. You just need.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just talk.
I submitted what is now warrant article 28, recommending adoption of Robert I. Sperber as the name of the former devotion school. I believe that Sperber is of the three choices that have been put before town meeting in the 3 warrant articles. Sperber comes closest to the naming standards that have been adopted and used multiple times by the Town of Brookline Naming Committee, and that he best exemplifies somebody who has made extensive and long-standing contributions to the Brookline school system. He served as superintendent of schools for 18 years, during which time, among other things, he was one of the founders of METCO. He was a great supporter of racial equality in the schools and did a lot to promote educational opportunities for kids of all backgrounds. He was nationally recognized as a leader in public education. When he retired from the Brookline school system, in a sense, out of protest of Prop 2.5, because he felt that the voters had basically crippled the towns and other towns' ability to properly fund public education. He was also one of the founders and initial co-chairs of the Economic Development Board here in Brookline, EDAB, which specifically was intended to find ways to maintain a stable and growing tax base to fund education in Brookline, among other things. Sperber is, I think, a fine choice. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards in Brookline. He's been recognized both here and elsewhere as a key figure in public education, and should be honored by having this school named after him. Brookline has a tradition of naming public schools for people who have been heavily involved and who have heavily contributed to public education in Brookline. Runkle was, for example, served on the school committee. He was president of MIT. He was one of the founders of MIT. He was, I think, its second president. Lincoln was involved with MIT and Wellesley, and others who have had schools named after them have similarly been involved and active in public education in Brookline. Sperber easily fits in that tradition. And unlike, for example, others that have been suggested, he, I think, satisfies the requirements of the naming committee and is certainly somebody that should be given consideration. I want to turn briefly, and I'm not going to use my whole 15 minutes, Cliff, but I do want to turn briefly to the issue of process. And Barbara Brown made a comment just in that last 16 seconds before, and I actually agree with it completely. We have laws, and we have process, and we need to follow them. On July 29th of this year, I filed a public records request with the school committee asking for a series of documents pertaining to the process that was utilized to establish the ultimate recommendation of the school committee for the name of the school. Those documents have been trickling in. The deadline that the school committee had as a legal matter to provide those documents has now long since passed, and I only have a scattering of the documents that I requested. I received an email today suggesting that a large data dump or document dump was about to show up. I haven't received it yet, so I don't know what's in it. But I based a lot of my understanding of the process on the documents that I did receive. Now, I commend the kids who participated in this process, and they certainly did put a lot of work in, and I thank them for that. But unfortunately, that's not the way our process works. We have a process that requires that meetings for advisory boards or subcommittees who make recommendations to the town be open to the public, that they be noticed on the town website, and that members of the public be given an opportunity to submit comments or other input to these processes. That did not happen here. In fact, I received no minutes of any of those meetings. I received agendas for only the first 5. I don't know if others were prepared, but none were provided. What I did receive, among other things, was a document that suggested that in addition to the town naming criteria, certain additional criteria were provided to the students involving slavery and restorative justice. Now, the problem there, again, is those criteria may be of interest, but they don't fall within the standard criteria, and at the very least, they should have been made public. When the process was opened up in December to the submission of nominations by the members of the public, a list of 5 criteria was provided, 4 of which were basically the town naming committee criteria, and the 5th was the school motto of be kind, etc. There was no mention in there of slavery, restorative justice, or anything of the sort. But yet, that seemed to be the driving force behind much of the selection process. And when we saw that 14 of the 15 so-called semifinalists were people of color, that certainly suggests that it is these 2 criteria and not the standard naming criteria, not the votes that were submitted by members of the public, or at least the names that were submitted by members of the public with respect to the originally established criteria, that seemed to be controlling. And what's particularly interesting is that the name that was finally selected, Florida Ruffin Ridley, that name was submitted by only 2 people in the public nomination process. And the 2 people that submitted that name were Deborah Brown and Ann Greenwald. So we have the 2 petitioners who seem to be working with the student committee, who ultimately basically submitted the name that was and were the only ones to submit the name that was adopted. I find this offensive. It's offensive to our process, and it suggests to me.
There's supposed to be no negative comments here?
No, I had a communication with the moderator and was advised that I could have this discussion, and I'm going to have it.
The moderator, Sam Gatsby, indicated today that we should be as broad as possible. I don't think Lee's characterization as something being offensive to him is necessarily bad. But Lee, I will ask you again, as I have done several times already this afternoon, to try to refrain from being inflammatory. Please.
I'm trying to describe the process that took place. If the process that took place seems inflammatory, I will tell you that I believe it was, and that's sort of unfortunate.
You can describe the process without editorializing, I think is what.
Well, I did not get the impression from Sandy that I needed to constrain that, but I will try to respect it. How much more time do I have?
You have 5 minutes.
All right, I will try to wrap this up. I have, as Cliff mentioned, I was the one who submitted the open meeting law complaint to the school committee. The process that is used is the submission goes to the school committee. The school committee has 14 business days to respond. I submitted it last week, so there's probably another 2 weeks before we will hear anything from the school committee, after which I'm entitled to and may well submit it to the Attorney General for further adjudication if the school committee does not provide a satisfactory response. Separate and apart from that, the description that I provided of the process in my open meeting law complaint, I think stands on its own. Whether or not there was an express violation of the open meeting law, and I believe there. Cliff, I'm going to ask you as chairman to.
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. Lundy, please don't interrupt. Other people have brought, in fact, everyone everyone who's spoken today has brought up process. There's not a single individual who has spoken who has not, in one way or another, discussed process. That's just a fact.
Can you speak closer to the mic? I can't hear you.
The mic isn't actually a microphone, it's for the television. So please try to project a little bit further.
I'll do what I can. I have described the process as manipulative and exploitive of young children. I believe that to be the case. And as evidence of that, you heard the children this evening basically saying to you that you should go along with them because they worked very hard on this. And I think that's part of the manipulation. You should select, and the town meeting should select, a name that is appropriate, that meets the town standards, and that is not subject to a flawed process. There's no rush to reach a decision here. I believe that probably the best approach, and I will so recommend when this comes up at the advisory committee, is that all three of these names might be referred to a moderators committee, and a revised and totally transparent and open public process be adopted for as long as it takes to come up with a name that satisfies the town's criteria and that is open, fair, and does not contain any ethnic or racial predispositions. Thank you.
So I want to make one quick announcement relevant to this, and then we'll open up for comments from the public. People raise their hands, and I will call on them. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the meeting tonight that on October 18th, from the hours of 7 to 10 o'clock, the town's naming committee will be going. I'm sorry.
October 6th.
I'm sorry. 16th.
It's 16.
Can't read my own handwriting. We'll hold a meeting, a public hearing to discuss this topic. The Coolidge Corners.
It's only fair if you
So town's naming committee, you could talk to them after he's done. Maybe you could talk to them after. So we're going to open it up for comments, and despite my admonition at the beginning to avoid process, obviously the door's been opened, and so I'm not going to preclude anyone from making a comment about process. So the first hand I saw was. Please, when you come to the up front, please state your name, but also try to keep your comments to just a few minutes.
So I'm Ken Liss. I'm the president of the Brookline Historical Society and a member of the school committee's task force on school names, but I'm speaking tonight for myself, not for either of these groups. I'm speaking in favor of Florida Ruffin Ridley, although I've been told on good authority that she actually pronounced it Florida. So the name recommended by the school committee from among the finalists put forth by the group of children. But I feel something of a personal connection to all three of the names that have been placed on the warrant for town meeting, and I have good things to say about each of them tonight. I didn't know Ethel Weiss well. My daughters went to Pierce School, but I'm friends with Ethel's daughter, Anita Jameson, and I've accepted from Anita and her sister on behalf of the Historical Society some mementos of Irving's Toy Store that we hope to use to perpetuate Ethel's memory and the memory of the store she ran for so long. Ethel Weiss's legacy reminds us that a school both is a community and is part of a community, and that community is defined by relationships of many kinds. I served with Bob Sperber and his wife Ethel as a Precinct 6 town meeting member for 5 years, long after he had retired as school superintendent. I learned a lot from Bob about town politics, but mostly about how difficult issues can be approached thoughtfully with room for reasoned discussion and careful deliberation. I also learned, though not from him, that Bob was a key player in the creation of Metco and in Brookline's participation in it. The Sperber Education Center in the Pierce School Building recognizes his successful efforts to transform the schools while meeting different challenges than those faced by the 19th and early 20th century school officials for whom many of our schools are named. I never met Florida Ruffin Ridley, of course, but I feel at least partly responsible for bringing her to the attention of those working to find a worthy person after whom to name a school. I met Florida, so to speak, through my historical work when, following up on a question, I tried to identify the first black property owners in Brookline. I wrote about her in my Brookline history blog and had a poster about her at Brookline Day 2 years ago where someone, I think it was Maya Norton, saw it and added her name to those being considered for the school name. You've heard a lot about Florida, who lived here for almost 30 years, very influential and participated in both civil rights and women's rights. What hasn't been mentioned, she was also a Brookline school parent. Her children, Constance and Ulysses Jr., known as Archie, were graduates of the Lawrence School and of Brookline High School. Naming a school after Florida Ruffin Ridley would be recognition that some Brookline residents contributed to our town, to education and to human progress, despite obstacles and prejudices that those for whom schools are usually named did not have to face. The choice of Florida, unlike those of Bob and Ethel, came through the process set up to choose a new name. That process, whatever its flaws, brought school children into the town's decision-making in a way that may never have been done before. I know that the warrant articles for other names are part of the town's established processes too, but I do worry about the message that choosing someone else will send to the kids who are asked to lend their voices and their minds to the decision. But mostly I worry that a protracted debate over which name to choose will in itself be divisive, pitting one set of advocates against another. So I hope that all sides will present their cases, arguing for their choice without denigrating the other names or the people who proposed them, and that town meeting will, in the end, vote to place the name of Florida Ruffin Ridley on this historic Brookline school.
If everyone who wants to speak can raise their hand, just so try to understand the time. 1, 2, 2, let me speak. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. 7. So the advisory committee is coming in here at 7:30. I would like the subcommittee to be able to ask questions, so please try to limit yourselves to 3 minutes, as Ken actually just did. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go around.
Good evening. Please excuse that I'm going to read from my notes that I made tonight. My name is Susan Halpert. I'm a graduate and I would say a proud alumna of Devotion School and Brookline High School. Thank you for holding this open forum. Fortunately, I learned about it through the Devotion alumni Facebook page. I previously wrote letters to the tab, contacted school committee members, the superintendent's office, etc., and encouraged them to visit this page and learn how strongly alumni were united in opposition to the renaming of the Devotion School. I never received any responses, so I'm glad to be here tonight. No doubt the believers of change put in a great amount of time and effort and learned much in the process. You spoke well and showed presence beyond your years. However, this is not about how much time you devoted to the process and the concern that your efforts might be for naught. Actually, your process spawned an important lesson in democracy. It needed to take into consideration the history and experiences of years and years of alumni. History is in danger of being erased. It counts for something, even if it's hurtful. The town has voted, however, to definitely rename the school. No doubt, Florida Ruffin Ridley was a great woman. Although I know a fair amount about local history, I'd never heard of her before this process. Despite her accomplishments, I am totally opposed to renaming the school in her honor. She has no tie to the school. Ms. Brown, I'm Jewish. Please don't tell me what my Jewish values should be or the meaning of the upcoming Jewish New Year. Because central to Jewish values is the idea of remembrance, remembering those who came before us, taught us, and loved us, and we honor them. That is why I am here in support of renaming it after Ethel Weiss. She made such a loving impression upon me and so many thousands of others over the years. I have a signed poster of Irving's on my kitchen wall noting many happy memories which should not be forgotten. I'll say it plainly and wrap it up. No one else, for all the reasons previously stated by Mr. Ruttman and Mr. Davis, no one else is more deserving of this honor. Simply, to me, anything else is political correctness run amok. I urge you to do the right thing in this case and rename Devotion after Ethel Weiss. Thank you.
Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member of the Advisory Committee. I just want to clarify process for those who may not be as familiar with it as some others. And I'll say this, I'm as familiar with the naming process as perhaps anyone in this room. I wrote the last version of the naming committee bylaw, which was approved at the May town meeting. There is one authority in town for naming, and that is town meeting. We have a bylaw. The naming committee has established criteria. That criteria was approved by the select board. It does not bind town meeting. The school committee established a process. I won't speak to it. Some have dispute with it. There was a vetting. There was nominations. There were review of names. There were recommendations. None of that is binding. I say this as a member of the advisory committee where for the most part all of our work is recommendation and is non-binding. Keep in mind that all of these recommendations, all of these arguments will be given due consideration, but it is in fact town meeting in its sole authority who will make this decision. Thank you.
My name is Beth Jones, and my son Gareth Jones was a member of the CCS naming committee. He's now a 9th grader at the high school. And I was going to read a letter that I had sent to a number of you, but instead, what I'd like to do is draw your attention to last Friday, where we had what was presumably the largest climate protest in history run by youth. And I would really like to defer to the fact that we can all have opinions here as adults regarding what should happen for the kids at this particular school, but they go to the school. And it strikes me as a parent in this town, my son went to BEEP. He has taken advantage of every educational opportunity in this town, some of which I don't understand why we can't give credence to the opinions of our youth. I really don't. It's not, and I don't, whatever you presume to be process. I was a town meeting member in this town for several years, and I stopped because I was so frustrated by how long the processes take in this town. And I'm almost, honestly, this is going on record, but I'm embarrassed by this process, and not just because I'm a parent, but because I think it doesn't demonstrate our best selves. I thought Ethel Weiss was an amazing person. My son went there frequently. He was a very rambunctious kid, and she had extraordinary patience for him. Robert Sperber has a building that's already named for him. I don't see why this is, I can't believe that this is being submitted to the AG's office. Again, this I am incredulous. And my intention was not to stand up here with this tone. I really don't want to have this tone. I just want to have the school named by the people who go to the school. Why is it so complicated? Why can't we, there were many signs at the climate protest that said, why do the children have to be the adults in the room? We adults are not acting well as adults, I don't think, in this. And I'm sorry I have to be here tonight. My son couldn't be here because he's actually participating in Brookline sports. I just wish we could take care of this and move on. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm supposed to talk into this. Can you hear me all right? All right. Now, I'm a school teacher, so I know how to pipe up. So here's the thing.
What's your name?
I'm happy to tell you my name. My name is Trudy Goodman. And I came a long way because there's a couple of things I want to say. One is I went to the Edward devotion a long, long time ago. But I remember Ethel from before that. I was born in 1954. I lived here for a small amount of time in Boston, and then came back into Brookline. And Ethel really never changed. Here's the thing about Ethel, and here's what I'd really like these kids to know. And understand, I'm a school teacher, so I'm really happy when my students want to be part of the democratic process. It's incredibly important. And I'm also of color, whether I look it or not. Some people don't. You can't judge everybody by the same standards. So here's the thing. Ethel just went out of her way with me, and I never forgot her. And I think it's apropos that this comes up right before Rosh Hashanah, when Rosh Hashanah is a time where we try and remember those who have been good and have been kind to us. And I'm sorry I didn't know about Floridia. I'm sorry I didn't remember about Dr. Sperber. I went to Brookline High School. As I say, I graduated from the devotion. Now, there's two ways to look at it. I wish that they'd kept the name devotion and used it as a teaching moment to teach children about slavery and the injustices of slavery and the difficulties of slavery. I wish they had done that. But since they didn't, and they came up with 3 names, and I'm glad one of them is Ethel. Now, I just want to tell you a little small story about Ethel. I was a really fat little kid. I mean, you know, I was the nutty professor of little children. Okay, so, and I was a very shy kid when I went to devotion. And I didn't speak English very well because a lot of people in my family didn't. And I would go into Ethel's store, and Ethel would go out of her way for me. And I thought it was unusual till I found out Ethel was like that with everyone who walked through the doors of that, whether they were small or tall or big or fat or whatever they were. And the other thing is that she took the time. I went in there one day and, you know, being a little kid, I hunkered down and bought all these candy bars that was gone. And when she took me aside, and, you know, she was like strong love, not gentle love, okay? She took me aside and she said, I'm not going to let you buy any more candy bars. Trudy, what are you doing? And I said, well, I hadn't really thought about that. She said, you got to go home and you got to think about this for a while. Now, I had good teachers at devotion. Not one of them ever took me aside and told me the truth about anything like that. I went home and I thought about it. You know, that woman, she changed my life. I wish these kids had got to know her. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't name a school after Floridia. I'm telling you that the devotion school is not the school to name it after. Ethel was part of Coolidge Corner. She was part of the fabric of the devotion school. She gave her time and energy and money to that school. And more importantly, her love to the students who went to that school. And I came this way because it was important that I felt that you needed to know how much she loved the students at the devotion, how much she probably would stand back in this situation and shrug her shoulders a little bit and say, well, that's not why I ever did anything that I did. She did it out of the goodness of her heart. But she is the right person to name this school after.
I'll be brief. My name is Pam Roberts. I'm a former Devotion PTO president. I was on the Devotion Building Renovation Committee. And probably the most important is I'm the mother of 3 Devotion graduates, a 26-year-old, a 23-year-old, and now a sophomore in high school. I'm also still a volunteer in the library, so I see some of these kids. I take my cues from my children. They are all very happy with the name change of the school. They are all thrilled with the name of Florida Ruffin Ridley. Therefore, I would encourage you to go ahead with that name. I think it's thrilling. There's only one school in this town that's named after a woman, and I'm frankly tired of that. I knew Ethel Weiss. She actually, little known fact, was a classmate of my mother's in high school, at Portland High School. She was a lovely woman. But I think going forward, Florida Ruffin Ridley is transformative. Thank you.
I'm Joyce Joswicki, town meeting member from Precinct 9, former school committee member, a Brookline resident for 50 years. From 1969 to 1991, I had children at the devotion school. I was involved. I knew a lot of kids. Brookline prides itself on being a leader. There is not a single public school in the state of Massachusetts named for a Jew. Ethel Weiss represents two of the underrepresented groups for whom we have named buildings in Brookline. She is a Jew and she is a woman. But more than just that, she loved all of the kids. Thousands of kids were affected by her presence. She went into the school and lectured to the first graders about managing their money and saving money and not wasting it. Her motto's very similar to what went on at the school. Devotion School had children from almost 40 countries. Almost 30 languages were spoken at Devotion. And I was there. I met those kids, and they went to the store. And the patience that Ethel showed as they learned English and learned about American money and learned about spending it wisely and saving it, those are lessons those children who are now in their 50s remember. My children are in touch with many of those students in South America, Israel, Japan, China. They're in touch with them. They were upset about losing Devotion School. Hey, not anyone is perfect. Good men can be flawed. In his time, he owned a slave. But that ship has sailed. We're changing the name of the school. But we should name the school after someone who so greatly affected our kids and some of you, our town, our neighborhood. Not a symbol, but someone real. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Erica Anderson, and I am the mother of this young lady, Liv Clowder. And when she spoke about what they did on the process, she did not exaggerate. None of these kids exaggerated the amount of time and effort and thought and commitment and dedication that they put into this process. And I say that not because, not to sit here and talk about the process, but because when we're looking at these warrants and we're considering the names, I can guarantee you that nobody else suggesting a name for this school put in that level of time, effort, and commitment and thoughtfulness into who the school should be named after. It's not a surprise that there are a lot of complaints about both the name change and about the process, but those complaints shouldn't invalidate what these kids have done and shouldn't invalidate the hard work that they put into this. In fact, whatever process was chosen, we can be sure that people were going to complain about it. Someone wasn't going to like, or lots of people weren't going to like what that process is. So the fact that there are complaints about the process really shouldn't be something that carries the day here. It's not enough. We've heard a lot of people stand up and pay respect to these kids in words, and I've seen it online. I've heard it said to my face and to these children's faces throughout this entire process. But it's not enough to just pat these kids on the head and tell them thanks for your hard work, but no thanks to your name. We can't say that we respect what they did out of one side of our mouth and out of the other side of our mouth complain about the process and their recommendation. We respect their hard work, their thoughtful consideration by naming the school after their recommendation. At one of the public meetings where the kids presented the 15 names that they had narrowed down from the 100 nominations that they received, the father of another child on the committee and I were talking about how impressed we were and how amazed we were with how well these kids knew the nominations and were able to talk about them and explain why they were good nominations for the school name. And he said to me, you know, I wish they renamed a building every single year. This is what education should be like. And despite all of the negative feedback, all of the complaints, the long and tedious process that this is, he's absolutely right. Renaming the school is a teachable moment for these kids, but more importantly, it's a teachable moment for us. For the past several years in Brookline, there has been a debate about race. And yet when these kids emphasize the importance of honoring people of color and honoring women, telling stories that have long been untold or forgotten, people complain that the process was unfair. We've heard a lot of that tonight. They complained the process was racist and that the finalists didn't represent our town. People complain that naming a school after a person of color doesn't right Edward Devotion's wrong, and it doesn't right the racial wrongs in this town. And that's true. You can't right the wrong of taking a man's life through slavery by renaming a school. It doesn't remedy the racial issues in this town. But it is a start, and we have to start somewhere. And I would suggest that the first step is by naming the school after Florida Ruffin Ridley, by honoring a woman who dedicated her life to teaching and preserving Black history and culture, who may have been the first Black property owner here in Brookline. She lived only a mile away from the school that we want to name in her honor. She promoted women's rights, and she fought injustice in multiple ways. Naming the school after her in no way dishonors the wonderful people who have been discussed tonight, Ethel Weiss and Mr. Sperber. I knew Ethel Weiss not well, but we live on Beale Street, so I walked by her shop many, many times a day. And what's, I think, most telling about what we've heard about both Ethel Weiss and Mr. Sperber is they were advocates of children. They stood up for what the children wanted, and they stood up for the children's belief, and they advocated for them. And I cannot speak for them, and I won't pretend to speak for them, but when we advocate for children, we advocate for the names that those children chose. So with all due respect for the people here who were able to stand up, who are willing to stand up in public and voice their views, and I give them a lot of credit because there's a lot of online comments where people are not willing to make in public. So I give people credit for coming here and speaking in public. With all due respect to them and with all due respect to the other names that are being submitted tonight, I urge you to name the school after the students' recommendation. Don't ignore their hard work. Don't silence their voices. Don't start them on a path of cynicism towards government where they spent an entire 9 months working on this for really no reason. And apart from what that process is, Florida Ruffin Ridley's story deserves to be told. It deserves to be honored, and it deserves to be known in this town. And that can be done by naming the school after her. Thank you very much.
Behind me? I guess I get a few more seconds.
Yes.
I'm walking faster.
Okay, I haven't started.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Brown, Chair and founder of Hidden Brookline, bringing to light the hidden history of slavery in Brookline, which has existed for over 13 years. I want to say three very brief things. One is that people who would like to see the school named Florida Ruffin Ridley are also committed to having something important at the school named after Ethel Weiss. So this is not one or the other. This is one and. Second thing is, no one has mentioned what happened after the four final names came out of the school. It went to the school committee. The school committee is the one who chose, not for the final thing, because of course as my good friend here says, it is the town meeting which will be the final arbiter. But they were the next step in the process. And they chose 7-0 to 1. One person was away, one person abstained in favor of Florida Ruffin Ridley. The third very brief thing I'd like to say, and it relates to Hidden Brookline, is there is so much of our history we have not known, which is why our committee was founded and why it's called Hidden Brookline. Because we have not known, until recently, most of us, the hidden history of slavery in our town. We also have not known the hidden history of African Americans in this town. It was only in the last few years that Roland Hayes' name became well known. That was partly because of our work. But it's also only perhaps last year that John Wilson, who's magnificent head of Martin Luther King, stands in the town hall as a gift from the people of Brookline. People didn't know about John Wilson. People didn't know about Roland Hayes. And that's not to blame anybody, but that's part of what's been hidden from us, and we can take it back. And, of course, Florida Ruffin Ridley. I want to say 3 things about her being a Brookliner. First, she was a parent in the schools for 21 years. Secondly, she was one of the co-founders of the Second Unitarian Church, which is now Temple Israel. Third, she was a member of the Brookline Suffrage Association. 4, she did her early writing and publishing of the women's newspaper from Brookline. So this is someone we have missed, we have lost from history, and we have a chance to reclaim her. She's not she was a national figure, but she had nothing to do with us. She did. Thank you.
Thank you, committee. I'm Susan Houston. I live at 1258 Beacon Street. I'm used to speaking before planning board, so my address is, that's why I have given you my address. But I hope you don't mind my reading this. I'm reading this on behalf of myself and my husband, Julian Houston. We've been residents here for 40 years in Brookline, and we're supportive of Warrant Article 26, naming the Coolidge Corner School for Florida Ruffin Ridley. And in affirming the school committee's recommendation, the advisory committee would be respecting a collaborative, thoughtful, and transparent process in whose outcome participants placed their trust. To reverse course would be a violation of that trust. We do acknowledge that many eminent contenders were nominated, including the 2 worthy individuals presented in Warrant Articles 27 and 28. The choice of Florida Ruffin Ridley is to be applauded and gives Brookline the chance to engage in an act of restorative justice. We do believe that that was an important criterion here. Miss Ridley, who was born before the Civil War, was a teacher, abolitionist, and suffragist. She was a co-founder of the Second Unitarian Church in Brookline. It's now Temple Sinai. And she and her husband were one of the first African-American homeowners in Brookline. Born into a distinguished Massachusetts family, Florida Ruffin Ridley was the daughter of George Lewis Ruffin, the first black graduate of Harvard Law School and the first black judge in the United States. And her mother, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, was a writer, activist, and civil rights leader, and both she and her mother together founded several organizations to advance the cause of black women's rights. Our students and community have much to learn from the Ruffin Ridley example. On a personal note, the renaming of the Coolidge Corner School to include a distinguished descendant of the Ruffin family would be particularly gratifying for my own family. In 1984, my husband, Judge Julian Houston, Brookline resident, founded the George Lewis Ruffin Society, which supports Massachusetts minority professionals in the criminal justice system. So thank you for considering affirming the school committee's recommendation to bring the Ruffin name to Coolidge Corner.
Hi, my name is Jean. I'm the mom of two students that goes to public school in Brookline. Felix Situ is my younger one. From what he has been get involved into the community, I can realize that how much hard work the children the Coolidge Corner School student they devote to this renaming process, and I can feel that how much the process is well organized, and those students in the community is led by their educators, which is very good learning experience for the young students. And I can't say too much about how much hard work they have done, but I just want to remind all of the adults in the conference room that I'm thinking that the students from the Coolidge Corner School, they might be the people who cares their school the most. So for all those young children, they devote their hard work, they devote their time to helping the school to select all those names. So as a mom, I'm kind of, I would like to eager all the adults to have a careful consideration about who will be benefit from this renaming, which for the students, it's a very good learning experience for them. And also the role model that Florida so demonstrated to the children, which for her hard work, it will be a lifelong benefit, the impression for all those children. Thank you all.
Good evening. I'm Rob Hollister. I'm a 35-year resident of Brookline. My wife and I live on Copley Street. I'm a parent of two proud alumni of the Devotion School, Caitlin and Susanna. They are very pleased with the decision to rename the school, and they're enthusiastic supporters, as am I, of the recommendation that the school be named for Florida Ruffin Ridley. I think on the merits, Ms. and I liked very much how a number of you this evening commented candidly on your lack of prior knowledge before this whole renaming process about Ms. Ruffin Ridley's life and her accomplishments. But as I've looked at the material and as I've reviewed information about her, I think on the merits she is an impressive choice because of the way in which her life and accomplishments fit the stated criteria that have guided the process. I wanted also just to offer a brief comment since process has come up. And I appreciate that people have different views on the process question. As one citizen of the town and as someone who attended a number of the opportunities to make public comment, for my money, the process is an exemplary one and is impressive in its transparency, in the extensiveness of which of opportunities for public process, for public participation. A number of you this evening have applauded the student participants in the process for how hard they've worked. And I think that is an important consideration. But as a lifelong educator, I'm a retired professor at Tufts University. What I think is most important about the students' participation is the quality of their work. I take particular exception to the view that the students have been manipulated. I've worked my whole career as a teacher, as an educator. In my interactions with the students in this process, I can tell what's phony, I can tell what's real, and the quality of their explanations to me and their answers to my questions were impressive. My understanding of the process is that the town hasn't said the kids should just take it over and whatever they recommend should be the way it ends. But I think to me, it's the quality of their work that makes the recommendation that they are part of important. Thanks very much.
I'm sorry?
I just wanted to make clear the role of the naming committee.
Sure.
2 minutes and 1 minute.
1 minute, please.
All right. Okay, I know it's been a long night. I'm Ruth Kaplan. I'm the newly elected chair of the naming committee, which has been brought up a couple of times tonight. The naming committee was just convened about a week and a half ago. We are going to be taking up this issue, and the chair here announced tonight when that hearing is. It's going to be on October 16th at the Coolidge Corner School from 7 to 10 in public comment. We're leaving a lot of time. Hopefully it won't go that long. And we will be making a recommendation. We'll be deliberating that night and making a recommendation. So I know it's a little confusing in terms of process because so many of you came here tonight and are testifying so passionately and intelligently about your positions. But I'd just like to urge you to come back again, if you can, to the Coolidge Corner School. It's because we have a few members of our committee here tonight just informally, but our committee will be meeting as a committee, and it's our role to make a recommendation to town meeting as well. And so I just wanted to really encourage people who have spoken tonight from all of your perspectives to come again so that our whole naming committee can hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You get the dead knife.
Look, I think he was going to go in the middle. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So at this time, excuse me. At this time, I'm going to ask the subcommittee members if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask any of the petitioners. Dennis.
I actually have a question for the chair.
Yes, sir.
Which is, do you have any insight into how the discussion and vote will go at town meeting? Since there are 3, not what the result will be, but how the process will work, given that there are 3 conflicting warrant articles?
I don't. That's really going to be up to the moderator. If I was to hazard a guess, I would think that he would take an approach similar to what we've done tonight, which is to hear them all at the same time, because that's generally what he does with articles that have commonality. but I can't speak on his behalf.
The question is as it relates to the vote. For example, tonight, are you expecting at most one yes vote and two no votes?
So,
or some other outcome?
yeah, so maybe some other outcome. And before maybe I offer up a suggestion or at least an opinion, I'm going to get back and see whether or not there are any questions that anyone has for any of the petitioners.
I do not.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a comment?
David.
You've got a comment. Okay. So we've heard an awful lot about process, but I keep on thinking about a decade from now or a couple decades from now. Does any of the petitioners want to speak about after, you know, everyone that's been involved in this process now has already graduated from the new school, whatever its name is? Now, what's going to be the meaning and importance of that name for the school? This is really, to me, the argument. And it goes back to climate, and I would like some maybe comment on the climate and culture of the school, how this name, that name, or the other name will be beneficial to the school.
Well, I guess that's a question to all three petitioners, if anyone wants to address that question.
No.
Please.
I believe that. Do I need a mic?
No.
All right. I'll speak up. I believe that when we're sitting around and asking ourselves about names 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, I think the name Florida Ruffin Ridley has resilience. And I say that because just because we didn't know about it, it didn't mean that the dean of the Radcliffe Center didn't know about it. It didn't mean that the dean of the Houston Center at Harvard Law School wasn't familiar with her and her family. There's a way that we're actually getting on a bandwagon that some people are already on. And we're going to be riding with a name that represents something that's strong and great. A feminist, an abolitionist, an educator, a writer. I mean, can you imagine our children reading about books? Reading stories about people that actually delve into the complexity of racism. And you can say, she lived down the street. My school's named after her. We have, you know, I'll use the word that came to mind was a magical opportunity to transform how we think about who we are in this community. And I think we have to grab it. These young people, every time I saw their exhibits, I would cry. I would go from one child to the next, and I would start weeping because they would introduce me to something that maybe I thought I understood, but when I heard it through their eyes, it took on a whole new meaning. We have an opportunity here, and I just hope that we have the capacity to seize it.
Thank you. Sir.
Well, let me just freely associate here. I'll never think this school as anything other than the Edward Devotion School. I mean, this guy had one slave back in the 17th century. He probably knew it wasn't the right thing, but I don't think that he thought about it the same way we do today. He left a lot of money, but he left the land for the school, and he did not. In his will, I think he said he wanted to get built so that they got around to that a long time later in the 1890s and created this school that really is a great school.
So, Mr. Rutman, the question was, okay, because we, I
think of the Edward Devotion School as always being the Edward Devotion School is there another school with a little house in front of it that this guy lived in? And so that we're renaming the school. I mean, we might as well throw Washington, Jefferson, and 14 presidents out in the trash who had slaves as well. So the question, so I'll always think of it as the Edward Devotion School, but that's, as several people have already said, is gone by. We're going to rename the school. I don't think renaming the school is a big deal when it comes to racism.
Okay, excuse me. I'm sorry. So I apologize for interrupting you. We have 15 minutes left. And the specific question related to looking down 40 years, what would, in your case, Ethel Weiss mean to the community then? Okay, but I'm going to give you 1 minute, and then I'm going to stop because we have to move forward. No, I think not.
Yeah, okay. I just don't think that renaming the school. I don't think kids who go to school think a lot about the name of the school. They really don't. I think in the case of Devotion School, we thought more about it because of that house and the history of the school. I think naming a school after somebody like Ethel Weiss, as I've suggested, is a good thing. Or naming it after Florida Ruffin Ridley or Bob Sperber would be a good thing. But I don't think it's going to change anything as far as the kids in the school are concerned. I don't think the question of fighting racism, which I'm very much in favor of course, has to do with patting ourselves on the back and saying, oh, we renamed the school, what a great thing. That is political correctness. And political correctness is something I don't like and I don't admire. I think every person should think for themselves. And when I think for myself, I think to myself that putting my arms around the black friends that I have and treating them the same as I would anybody else is way more important to solving the question of racism than the naming of a school. But right now we're involved in the naming of the school.
Thank you.
So
Mr. Rutman? Mr. Rutman?
The person who represents that school the best.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to add? You have a minute?
Again, we have, as I said, we have a long-standing tradition in Brookline of naming schools for people who have directly contributed to our school system. Bob Sperber certainly made long-standing contributions that will persist into the future for 20, 30, 40 years. And I think that he actually did things in Brookline to promote the kind of racial equality and racial justice that the proponents of the Ridley name seem to be concerned about, except that he actually did it and implemented it here. He started Benko. He took other measures to increase the opportunities for minority students. And that's what will be remembered. And I just think that maintaining that tradition with somebody as qualified and as highly regarded as Robert Sperber will persist for a long period of time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop conversation so that the subcommittee can make some decisions or not, and the rest of the advisory committee can file in here because they're due here in 12 minutes. So I'm going to offer a suggestion to the subcommittee. I think one of the comments I made when I made my opening thoughts was that they're really, you've got three very qualified people. There's sort of not a right or wrong decision. There's preferences. I think Neil mentioned the fact that town meeting has the final decision on matters like this. I also, and this is a personal statement, believe that these 3 warrant articles are perfect examples of matters that the advisory committee really adds no value to town meeting with, and I believe that. And frankly, if I thought I could have done this process and made that statement to everybody, and we would have had deliberations, we couldn't really do that. But I am saying that tonight. That is a topic. It really has very little to do with these specific articles. It really has to do with things that, and I'm a town meeting member, that a lot of folks at town meetings say, and a lot of folks in the advisory committee say, that we sometimes enter into situations where we really can't offer much to town meeting that town meeting can't figure out on its own. And because of that, I'm going to recommend to the subcommittee that we do something that I believe that the advisory committee should be doing more of, and hopefully it will. And I believe, I'm so glad he's here, our new chairman shares this philosophy. And my recommendation to the subcommittee is to vote no recommendation, and to have this go to the naming committee and then to town meeting, where all of this will be discussed again, and where the opinion of the advisory committee, frankly, will carry no weight, in my view. And it shouldn't on something like this. There really is not much that we can add to this process. Having said that, I will also say, as a town meeting member, I see absolutely no reason to not take the recommendation of those individuals who spent so much time and effort in this process. So I certainly know how I'm going to vote as a town meeting member. I just don't think the advisory committee really adds any value here. But my committee members, subcommittee members can disagree with that. So public comment's over now, so I really just want to...
I would ask if you could have the members of the subcommittee identify themselves.
I'm sorry. Thank you. We should have done that in the beginning.
Hi, I'm John Van Scoik, and I'm from Precinct 13.
Mariah Nobrega, Precinct 4.
I am from Precinct 14, Cliff Brown.
David Lescovier, Precinct 11.
Dennis Dowdy, Precinct 3.
Can I?
Please.
So, I appreciate what you said, Cliff. However, I want a chance to affirm my preference here and at town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am going to make a motion in favor of 26, which is Florida Ruffin Ridley.
Does anyone
Second.
else?
Second.
Okay. So we're going to have to, whatever we do, we're going to take individual votes on all 3, okay, because we're not lumping them together. So we have a motion for Article 26.
Sorry, so you're saying we have to vote on 27 and 28 even if no one makes a motion for them?
Well, you could make a motion for no...
I can make a motion for no recommendation on those 2, but I think it's, if you're going to take a vote on one, I think it's fair to the petitioners that you vote on each.
Okay.
I would like to have the same process for all 3.
And can the motion be for no recommendation on the other 2 or for no action? Or are you taking...
If you're going to make a recommendation for one, then you're not making a recommendation for the other. You should vote for no action.
Right, this gets back to my original question, which is whether we would be making a single recommendation, a ranked choice recommendation, because seriously, we're offering advice as a committee. I'm of the opinion, I agree with Cliff, that the advisory committee doesn't actually have much to say on this matter. However, we have been asked to give an opinion, and so therefore I'm going to give my opinion.
I think I'm loath to take all 3 together. I think we should, if we're going to vote on something, then we should vote each one individually. I just don't know how you would do it otherwise. You have to say something about each one because they are separate articles.
So can we do it?
Sure.
Okay.
We have a motion.
Well, we have discussion of the motion.
Is there any discussion on that motion?
Yes.
Please.
Okay, so I do not hesitate to let everybody in this room know that come town meeting, I will vote in favor of Florida Ruffin Ridley. However, I agree with Cliff's approach as far as the advisory committee is concerned. One thing that people need to know about the advisory committee is that in other towns, under other circumstances, our role is sometimes referred to as a finance committee. So our first and foremost obligation is to try to measure the financial impact of articles that come before town meeting. It's become more and more evident over the years as resolutions on various topics that do not necessarily have financial impacts come before town meeting. I'll be very blunt about it. Nobody listens to the advisory committee. Town meeting is a body of very intelligent and very experienced people from many, many, many different perspectives. They are perfectly capable of working this out on their own, and we are part of town meeting, those of us on the advisory committee for the most part. And we'll be part of that process at town meeting. But for us to claim some kind of greater wisdom on this issue when at the appropriate time town meeting is going to exercise its wisdom on this issue, I think just overstates our part in the process. So my recommendation would be as an alternative, and with all respect to Mariah, the wording is important. I think unfortunately there is, in the town meeting process, when you don't want something to be acted on, you say we recommend no action. So I think we have to be careful that we don't create a misunderstanding that somehow we're for no action on any of these. We're certainly for action, but we make no recommendation, I think is how we should word it. So I would recommend, and I'll repeat the recommendation on the other two articles as well, that on all three of these articles, we vote no recommendation and leave it to the wisdom of town meeting to decide.
David.
Yes, I agree with Cliff's approach. This is not an area that is related to our mission, which is to deal with the town's budget and the financial implications of warrant articles that come before us. I think that still there's value here. We have added value because the reality is when it comes to town meeting, the number of speakers will be very limited and the amount of time of those speakers will be limited. So this was a kind of big ear chance for people to come. There weren't strict limits, so people were able to be heard here, and this will be conveyed in our report that we will still publish through the combined reports, and that town meeting members will have an opportunity to read, even if we haven't taken a vote, which this is clearly a case where town meeting wouldn't necessarily pay any attention to it anyway.
Okay, so we have a motion from Mariah and a motion to amend that motion from John. So we're going to vote first on the amendment. So all those...
You have to second the amendment.
I'm sorry. Okay, all those in favor of a recommendation of no recommendation, please raise your hands. All those opposed? And abstaining. Okay, so that carries 3-2. Is that it?
I
No,
think
that was the amendment. Now you have to vote.
Now we're going to vote on. Okay, now we're going to vote. That is now the main motion. So all in favor of no recommendation, please raise your hand. All opposed? 4-1, 3-2.
So now
we
need
will
to do
repeat
the
that
other-
for the other two warrant articles. So for warrant article 27, we have a motion. Well, I'll make the motion of no recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? 1. Okay. For article 28, I'll make a motion for no recommendation.
Need a second?
Second, thank you. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good time.
Great job. I
Good
know how
job.
hard it can be to sit in front of all these people, and it feels overwhelming.